Hey there YouTube, this is JD aka the Rogue Painter. Welcome back for another episode of Mortal Realms Monday painting tutorials. For this episode we are focusing on issue 3 of the Mortal Realms magazine, and in particular the Castigators and Gryph-hounds. So for this video here we're going to be learning to paint the Castigator. The base, you can just look up the tutorial that I did for the Sequitors. I believe I got the base done in there, you can see that. I will check back if I haven't, then I'll post a link just here for how to paint this base separately. And I'll post a link just here for the Gryph-hound that is also included with issue 3. That will be a separate video in its own. So we're going to do this in a relatively quick style, you know, to get your model miniatures back on the battlefield, but still looking, you know, nice and presentable. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to be using metallic paints for the metal areas on these. So we're going to start with a base layer of Balthazar Gold. I do use exclusively GW paints at the moment, Citadel paints, just personal preference, something that I've used for years, so just something that I want to stick with for now. In future videos you may find me using other paints, other brands, but for now, as these are the most commonly used, we'll stick with these. So we're going to thin this down slightly, probably put a bit too much paint down for now, but I'm just going to thin it, as this paint that I'm using in particular is a little bit old, so it's thickened up a little bit. Obviously, if you're going to thin your paints, thin it to a ratio that, you know, works for your paints, that you can get a nice, you know, a nice base coverage with it. These are base paints, so they are designed to be a little bit thicker. So what we're going to do with this is just base paint all the gold armor areas. And this may take a couple of layers. If your paint is thinned right, it should actually take 2 to 3 layers of it. You don't want to paint it on thin, as I have said before. If you paint it on, sorry, you don't want to paint it on thick, as I have said before. If you paint it on too thick, you'll clog up small details, which it's a lot of Citadel models, in particular Games Workshop miniatures, do tend to have a lot of fine details in them, and you don't want to clog those up. So try and get a nice couple of coats down on all the gold areas. I know this does look quite dark for a gold, but we are going to do a bit of layering today. So we want to paint all the gold areas of the armour, all down here, the legs. This area is black, but make sure you get the back of the arm, the trims around the shoulder pads there, and obviously this side, legs, helmets, and any of the chest plate that you can see there. You'll notice that I have left the crossbow weapon off of the miniatures with these. This is so I can get to the areas behind them easily. Obviously, if it had the weapon there, you're not going to get to those areas too easily. The weapon doesn't have any gold on it bar the hand, but we are going to paint the weapons at the same time as doing the model himself. So obviously with the weapons, just get the hands in, the plate armour. Some of them show a little bit of the black cloth that they have. Obviously make sure not to paint that with the gold. Doesn't matter if you get a bit of gold on there, as obviously that will be covered with the black. So if you want to get on with doing those bits, and we'll jump ahead for the next section once you're done. Okay, so now that we have all our Balthazar Gold painted up, all our gold areas, next up we're going to paint all the blue areas, and for this we're going to use some Cantor Blue. So again, work from a palette, whether it's a wet or dry palette is, you know, personal preference, but try not to work from the pot. With the lid open you can dry out your paints a little bit. Just apply some of the blue down here, and again this is a base paint, so it is a little thick. We're going to thin it down a little, not the point of a layer paint, but just enough to get a good even coat on. And this is going to be obviously the shoulder pads up here and here, and the back of the cloak here. So let's get on with this, and rather than cut away, we'll just go through some quick brush care tips. So I think the number one tip I would have first would probably be, when assembling your models and you're using glue, give the glue time to dry. There is no easier way to ruin a brush than to paint right into an area of unset glue. It will dry almost instantly when it comes in contact with the paint, as water tends to have an effect on the drying rate of glue. It makes it go a bit weird, and it is almost impossible to remove without damaging your brush. So that's tip number one. Tip number two would be to clean your brushes after use with warm soapy water, or just some warm water. And what I tend to do is put a small drop of dish soap in the palm of my hand, and with some lightly warm water wet the bristles, and then sort of rush it around in the soap, and you'll remove the paint, rinse it, do it again, and keep doing that, new soap, until the soap is frothing up white, you know, with no pigment coming off in there. Once it's done, just give it one last rinse off and set them aside to dry, and that will keep your brushes in pristine condition. Tip number three would be, again, to do with rinsing the brush, but this time whilst painting. So what happens when you're painting and you're dipping into your paint, you're only using the paint that's on the tip of the brush. So any paint that is further up the bristles, nearer to the metal part, which is called the ferrule, any paint that's up there tends to dry. And if you don't rinse your bristles often, you know, even when using the same colour, not just between colours, what will happen, as you're painting here, the paint up here is drying, and once that dries fully, that becomes near impossible to wash off. So just rinse your brush every now and then, and that will take care of that. You won't have any problems with it. Right, sorry about the editing that there, guys. My camera seems to be playing up lately with this recording software, and it tends to drop the frames and becomes laggy, as you just saw. I'm trying for the life of me to figure it out. If any of you guys know what is up with it, the software I'm using is Streamlabs OBS, and I have it set to a maximum of 40 FPS for the camera, but for some reason it seems to be causing lag. It is a 1080p camera. It works fine most of the time, but every now and then it tends to decide it doesn't want to work properly. So yeah, if you have any solutions to that, throw me a comment down below. But right, where were we? So yeah, with these miniatures, that was it. This part on the end is very weak around the base of it here. I did actually snap mine off when I was sanding some bits, not on this one but on a different one. And also things like this, the little sort of emblem icon dangly bit here, you know, they can be a little bit weak around the points, so do be careful not to break those off. Brush tip number 4, I would say, round brushes in particular, but some companies do this with flat brushes, but you'll get a little plastic cap over the top of the brush. One of these, make sure to keep hold of these and reapply them to the brushes, just to keep them you know, keep them lasting longer in your paint holders and your pots. You know, you don't want them being bashed about and bending up the bristles. And when applying putting those back on, do make sure that the hairs come to a point, the brush tip comes to a point and goes in there nicely. If you jam it on and you bend hairs out, which I've seen so many people do, then the hairs end up sticking out and is almost unrepairable. You end up having to clip off hairs. Another tip about that is when you're buying brushes from a store, if the brushes are loose, remove the cap and check the brushes. Some people tend to remove the caps, have a look at the brush, decide they don't want it, and just jam the cap back on, messing up the bristles. And the last thing you want to do is buy a nice new brush, get home and find out that the bristles are all messed up. Although a lot of retailers may be decent and say, you know, we'll replace that for you, some could get funny and say, no, you've done that yourself, we're not replacing it. So rather than have the hassle of that, just check the bristles before buying. So that's our blue areas almost done. As you can see, I did the shoulder pads. This is a base paint, so it doesn't take too long or too many layers. This is now 2 layers. So I did the shoulder pads, went through the cloak, and now I'm just coming back to the shoulder pads just to get another smooth layer on there. Right, and that is our blue all done. Again, sorry for the bad edit there, guys. I did notice that the frame rates had decided to play up again, so I have made an adjustment to the FPS limit. Hopefully we won't have any further problems, but I'm hoping to try and find a solution for next video. Anyway, we will press on. If you're still sticking with me, I just want to thank you for your patience, and if you are enjoying the tutorial side of it, you know, I know the video is a bit dodgy, but please give it a thumbs up anyway. It does help the channel grow, gets me noticed and recognised in YouTube's algorithm. So next up, we'll just do a few quick bits of black areas, and for this it's just the inside cloth area here, and inside his arm pad there is an area in there that's sort of like black undergarment type area. That'll be just between the inside elbow and the armour, and then as you can see here, we've got this small area here of cloth exposed. Obviously this is going to be different on different models, but for this particular model that's just in there. And if you guys would like to see either more in-depth tutorials or a video maybe on each individual model, I mean they're all painted pretty much the same, which is why I'm just doing one model from a set per week. But if you would like to see each one done, then you know, let me know down in the comments, and I'll try and do that for future videos. So just go in there, and then behind the knee sometimes there is, but we can't actually see anything there this time. The cloak doesn't have anything black on it, so that's the black areas for that done. Next up is the weapon. So what we're going to do, because the paint will dry, we'll start off with the arm area here, and then as we work our way up the weapon, this area here will dry, and then we can hold it on this end. Now with paint and with holding it, you are going to rub some of the paint off, which is why we'll hold the this end. That way if we lose any paint, we can easily touch that up once it's reattached to the miniature towards the end. But for now we're just going in and painting the entire weapon black, obviously avoiding the gauntlet area there. So if you'd like to go ahead and paint yours, and we'll be back in just a second. Okay, so now that the weapon is done in black, we're now going to move on to the next colour, which will be a layer of Mephiston red. So again, just apply some of this to the palette. Don't need too much of this one, as it's just the inside of the smaller cloak, and the gem is probably way too much paint actually, but there we go. So for this, we're just aiming for the inside, the underside of this front tabard or loincloth, whatever it would be. It's a little long for the loincloth, so tabard. So just the under area of here, and then inside for this gem on the weapon here. Don't worry about getting it on the area of the outside that we've just painted, as that's silver, which is why we are doing the gem now, because it's on the inside and a little bit harder to get to without splashing paint on the outside. So we'll just go ahead and paint that, and then we can do the silver with a dry brush afterwards to avoid getting that onto the red that we're now doing. So just that under here, and we'll be back in a second. Right, once that's all done, we're going to do the front tabard area and the back here with a base layer of Xandri dust. Now I choose Xandri dust because we're not going to be highlighting this as a white. This is going to be using a Shakti bone as its main colour, so this works for a good base undercoat, sort of a tonal underlayer, and then we can use it for our sort of recessed areas rather than going with a grey wash or something. So we'll just paint all this up, being careful not to go over any red areas that we've done. Don't worry too much about going onto the medallion thing here, as obviously we'll be painting on over that anyway. But any areas that we have already done, we want to try and keep paint away from. This is where edge painting comes in handy, coming sideways with the brush. That way there are no loose bristles that can slip over the edge here. We're just painting using the side, and that will give you a nice clean line along the rim there. And obviously this is the area that would be most difficult if we had left the weapon, or if we had attached the weapon permanently. So again, just turn the miniature sideways and pull the brush along so that we get a nice clean edge. Okay, so once that's done, next it's just a few more little bits and we can move on to the next stages. So we're going to use some Mournfang brown just to do this pouch area here. So that's a base there, and for the inside of the cloak here, we're just going to use some Ulthuan grey or Ulthuan grey. And then for the silver areas on here and the weapon, we're going to use some iron breaker. So if you want to go ahead and do those areas now, or you can skip to once I've done them, I'll jump back next, and then you can have a look, pause the video, and then paint the areas yourself. Either way, we'll be back in just a second, guys, once that's all done. Okay, so once we have all those areas done, which is as I said, the brown on here, the silvers on here, and on here. There's also on the weapon here, I'll just do a close-up, a small section of gold here, and the base of this area here is gold. This is black, and anything else you can see is black. So if you want to pause the video, you can just see where all the silver parts are there, and the back there. So there we go, you can see everything that should be black at this point and everything that should be silver. So now what we're going to do is apply some washes. So our first wash is going to be a Reichland Flesh Shade Gloss, and we're going to apply this to all the gold areas. And the reason we're using the gloss is it will give us a nice sheen to the areas. So we're just going to dip our brush in here, scrape off some of the excess, and then all the gold we're just going to paint right along the edges, pulling the brush so that the paint or the wash deposits into the creases of the armour and those deep recessed areas under the knee in here. And the reason we're using the flesh shade is it has a nice reddish tone to it. And do anywhere that the light source from above wouldn't reach. So obviously we can go under here, down under the muscle area here, into the recesses here, and all along the foot, everything along the back here and along here. We get that into that crease there, all under the arm there, along here, over this entire piece, on his back. Right, the reason we're not using Nuln Oil is I find it tends to be too dark and leaves too much of a stain, which for gold shiny armour just isn't great. Doesn't leave a great look to it. The majority of this will be covered anyway, and we will do another coat of it once we've done our second layer of paint. This is just sort of a base go of it. You can avoid this step or skip this step if you like and do it on the next one. I will let you know the important one to do it on, but this is just personal preference for me. So we get down in this area, through here, just let it build up a little around the rivets there. A quick underlayer there, and again build up around the rivets. Pull some off with a slightly drier brush once you've deposited it elsewhere. But it is important that once this starts to dry, not to go back in and move it around, as you'll leave sort of watermarked stain areas. So down in the deep area here and in this corner here, and the same with this one. here and here. Right, and we'll also do this for the leather pouch. We go over all of it. This will give the leather a bit of a sheen, and then we can just put a quick highlight on that then. So that's all of that with the flesh shade. Alright, next up is some Agrax Earth shade, and you'll have to excuse my broken pot on this one. But for this, we're just going to do the recessed areas of the front cloth and back cloth. Again, just pull against an edge. Don't let it pull up too much, but pull against an edge just to deposit some of the wash down in there. You can paint over, and what you'll do is sort of stain the area slightly. Try not to let it pull too much in the bottom. It will want to collect. Obviously gravity will do its thing. So what I tend to do is paint over and pull out and remove some of that excess that wants to collect down there. We do want some collecting so we get a bit of a stain. So something like that is what we are aiming for. And then obviously the same on the back here. You can also do it this way. Put it down, dry the brush off slightly, and then just use the bristles just to suck some of that excess paint out. If you pull away too much, just touch to dab back in. And there we go there. And then obviously on this emblem on the back here, we do want it to pull up quite a little bit in there. And then just give it a quick pull over to pull some of that out. There we go. Just like that. Right, next up, and this is personal preference. You can replace this step with some Nuln oil instead. I'm just going to take some Druki Violet here. You can do this with a blue. I'm not sure what Citadel do for a blue version of this, but I'm sure they have one. I'm going to use this for my blue areas, as it will leave a nice dark tone right around the edges that isn't the same as the Nuln oil. Don't worry if it gets onto the grey area there. Obviously we can neaten that up, and we are just looking to paint into these blue areas, as this is a little bit more of a blue tone purple rather than a red. That does tend to work quite nice in these darker recesses. And then finally, for the weapon, we're going to use some Nuln oil there and go over all the silver metallic areas and the gemstone as well. Try not to let it pull up too much on that though. That is just, we want that in some of the edges there. So just let it pull, let it stain. And normal oil does tend to do this, it does stain very easily on lighter areas, which is why I prefer to use the earth shades and the violet instead of the normal oil if I can. So just wick away some of this. There we go, wick away some of that. Right, and then very carefully I'm going to hold that by the peg on the back and just go over the top of all this. These flat areas I tend to try and leave a little bit of the wash on it and stain it up a little bit, and then we can work that out with a highlight afterwards. So pull that away, wick it away off of there. There we go. So now all that's left is to leave those oils to dry for a good 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and then we can move on with the next stages. So as you can see, the brown is starting to dry already, and I do believe from the looks of it, the area for the golds is pretty much all dry. So just give that another 5 minutes and then we can get on with the next stage. Okay, so now that we've got all the washes done and dried, it's time to move on to the next stage. So first of all, we're going to use some Shakti bone, and we're going to thin this down quite a little bit. We're just going to go over the tabard area, and all we're doing with this is just the highlight and then down to just before the recesses, so roughly around about here. And we'll just work our way up to the highlight point, and that will deposit the majority of the paint up the top there. And the same coming this way, should be able to do this in one pass there, and just a little bit along the top, and the same here, and along here. Right, so like I say, we're just missing, or just the highlight areas, and then slightly towards that shaded off recess, leaving some of that wash and some of the Xandri dust showing. And then once it's dry, come back over. And stop. Go about 75% of the way to the first layer of this that you just laid down, and all we're doing is just building it up each time, going about 75% of the way down towards where the previous layer that you painted stopped, until eventually you're just painting the highlight there. And don't forget the back. So even on this, on the edges, come down to about 75% of the way down each time, and what you'll do is you'll slowly build the highlight up. Because the paint is thinned down, what we're doing is adding a very thin layer, and the previous layer will go almost clear, letting a small amount of the previous layer through. Allowing for a nice gradient. Now this isn't a smooth gradient as you could get if you were wet blending, for example, but this is, you know, a nice alternative. If you do take your time with it, you can get almost a smooth gradation. And obviously on his little scroll tab thing that he's got here, we can pretty much go over all of this. Just try not to get it into the recess there, as I just did. Right, so keep doing that until the colour that you're laying down at the highest point is the same as the colour it would be out of the pot. So obviously there's no dulling of it from the previous layers, and we'll get back to you in just a second. Right. So once that's done, we'll move on to the next colour. But just before we do, I just want to show the how thin you want your paint to be for this. If you look here, we can see that the colour is laying down all over, and then obviously just a small pickup on the as we leave. If it's too thin, what will happen is the paint will move and only pool up at the end. See how we don't have the colour there? That's when you know it's too thin. So what we are looking for is to deposit the paint across the whole stroke. It's almost there. There we go. So the paint is deposited across the whole stroke, and then obviously a small amount at the end. But you can see that it's not quite opaque, you know, you can see through it a little bit. So next up, we'll go for some Evil Sun Scarlet, and this will be for the back of the tabard. So again, same thing, layering. Thin the paint down, test it on your thumb, your nail. It's still slightly too thick, so we'll thin it just a little bit more. Now the red will show up thicker. Not sure if you can see that, but you can see the drop on the end there, and then that's not quite a solid colour, so we're almost there. Probably actually easier to over thin and then add a bit more paint in to bring it back. So there we go. Doesn't show up too well on camera, but that's what we're aiming for there. So same again, back of the robe. We're just aiming for the highlight area along the edge here. and the same on the outside edge, the other side here. Obviously we have to let that dry. And try not to move the paint whilst it's still wet, otherwise you'll end up with a coffee stain type look. But because it is watered down, it does tend to dry a little bit quicker than straight from the pot. And again, going about 75% of the way down with each layer. So let that dry between each layer and we'll come back once that is fully done. Right, so once you've got your layers, we should end up, I know it doesn't pick up too well on camera, but something a little like that. I think this side shows a little bit better. You see your dark, and then it goes to the lighter red on the end there. So the next colour up, we'll do the blue. Now this we're going to do a little bit different. We're going to take the Cantor blue from the base. Because it's a larger area, this works better with a bit of mix in between two of your colours. So put down some of the Cantor blue. And some Teclis blue. And Teclis blue is what we are going to use for the final highlights, but we need to get that gradient up there first. So we'll be going for a 50-50 mix of this, roughly. So what I tend to do is put them next to each other with a slight gap, and that will be your mixing area, and that way you can pull between the two and you can sort of see what it's doing, you know, how light or how dark you're going with it. So just a little bit more of the Teclis blue in there. Okay, and then we'll pick that up, move it somewhere that we can thin it. And then again, thin this down. I'd say with the water we're looking probably a 3-to-1 ratio, if not half and half, paint to water. That's 3-to-1 paint, and then the 1 water. So again, do the thumbnail test, still a little too thick. Rinse the brush as the paint was climbing up into the furrow there. There we go, that's what we're aiming for. So again, start at the highlight, leave just a slight gap around any surface. we're just looking to go on the edges and just shy of the deepest recesses with this. So once again, I'll get on with this, you get on with yours, and we'll be back in a bit, guys. Okay, so once that's done and dried, we're looking to have something sort of like this. And the next stage is just to highlight all this up. So some slightly thinned down Techless blue, just the Techless on its own. And just on the uppermost peaks, just going to highlight a certain area and then come down just ever so slightly. And don't forget the pauldrons here, so we're just going to highlight the sort of centre area and the ridge there. Obviously do this on both sides. And then again, just on the ridges, and then you just build this up until we've got the highlight colour only. If you want, you can use a slightly thicker paint just for the extreme highlights. There we go. I don't know how well that will come up on camera, but obviously we want the highlight to stand out quite a little bit. So just try and get a bit more on the cloth there, coming down here. There we go, that's your robe done. So now we'll take some Eshin Grey, just get that out of the light there, and we're just going to highlight, edge highlight all the black areas on both the crossbow and his sort of his glove, wrist guard type things. So almost like a dry brush, we can do this just slightly wet paint and just highlight sort of the raised areas on there. And then on the this one here, So we'll just go up the edge and along this edge here. You can come into it slightly because of the nature of the Eshen Grey being so dark. It does almost blend in nicely. And then we're just going to edge highlight parts of the crossbow here down the front. I don't know how well this will show up on camera, but if you wanted to go in for an extra layer, you could use a slightly lighter grey with it. So there we go. Alright, now for any silver areas, we're just going to take some iron breaker. Don't need to water this down, we can use this straight as it is. If you want to thin it, then you can, but we're just going to sort of highlight, you know, go over certain areas, leave some of that original non-oil in there. You can see I'm using the flat side of the brush, not the tip of the brush. I'm not going to bother doing the back side there, as that will be up against the body and won't be seen at all. If I thought that it'd be seen a little bit, then I would go in and paint that up too. So just on the front end here, if you do happen to go in any of these recesses, then let it dry, and then with a fine detail brush and a little bit of non-oil, just go back in and drop a blob of non-oil in there and let that set, and that'll darken it back up. This side here I will do, as I think it stands out from the figure slightly, so it will be seen if you were to rotate it. So I know these videos can get quite long, guys. I do try to keep them under an hour with a bit of editing, but I do also like to be a bit more thorough with, you know, going through certain sections, certain details, and trying to get certain effects. So those areas I tend not to cut out. And there we go, that's that done. And then we just got the emblem chain thing on the front here. And I think that was it, yep. So as you can probably tell, we're working one area at a time to completion. So we're doing the mid-tone, then the highlight for each area. So next up, I'm going to take some white scar. And we're just going to paint the emblem on the top here. Again, using the side of the brush, barely touching, just letting it take the paint. Almost blobbing it on. There we go, there's the emblem there. And then in here we can do the same thing. Thin the paint. And then just paint up about 75% of the way, build it up. So I'll cut through this and catch back up with you in a second, guys. Right, now that whilst we have the white, what we'll do, we'll take a little bit of this Ishapti bone, mix it in to get a paler version of it. Probably about a 70-30 mix white. And then we're just going to extreme highlight the tops of this. This isn't thinned, I am using this quite thick, just so we can get it to stand out a little bit. There we go, guys. And then the same on the back here. I'm not going all the way to the outer edges, it is just sort of a central area within a raised edge. Just as though the light was catching across it. And then the same with this, just down the side here slightly, and down the side here, just some edge highlighting. And if you want to, you can do a very light brush across. Just pick up a couple of raised edges through the centre there. I don't think that will show up too well on the camera. Right then, so we'll just get the brown pouch. Just going to use some Scrag Brown and just do a very quick edge highlighting for for this. Not too much paint, we don't need to water it down, thin it down or anything, and we're just going to pick up the edges. Because we did this with the Reichland Flesh wash, we can, it's got sort of a shiny, sort of new leather look to it. So all we're doing is just putting in some highlights, but because this paint is matte, it's going to sort of take away from the sheen a little bit, so we don't want to completely overload it. So there you go, just a small highlight, and then as you can see we got the shine, so it's almost shiny leather. Right, and finally, for the Retributor armour, this is going to go over all the gold pieces. So I'm going to take quite a bit of this out, and we are going to thin it and do it almost like a thin layering. Doesn't have to be too thin, this, because it's gold, it can have more defined edges. It doesn't have to be a gradual shine, as it will reflect hard surfaces, and that will give it sort of a harder edge highlight to it. So again, leaving too much paint there, leaving the innermost recess, come down along the pauldron. You want to leave this area dulled in, as that's our recess area. You can pick up the raised section just around the blue there, come back down the back side. Make sure there's not too much paint on your brush, otherwise it will pool up. And what we'll do, we'll just edge highlight around that rim there, all along this rim here and here. Any underside we will leave. So again, come along here, just pick up some edges. Use the side of the brush and just get some highlights on. Just see if we can see that with the pauldron there. I know obviously because it is a metal colour that we're working with, it does reflect with the light too much. You can see we've got the darker area in here that will come up to the highlight. If you can see where that yellow that white spot is, where our light is reflecting in the metal, that's where we will put a highlight. As you can see, when the light is from above, that's where a bright spot would be. So we'll actually paint one in there, which is another trick that I use when painting either true metallic metals or non-metallic metals. Use a light source. Angle your miniature towards the light source and see where the light reflects off of it, and then work with that. That's where your highlight will be, where the brightest area is, and then you work down. You know, you shouldn't have to guess where the highlight would be. Just aim aim a light at your model to show you where the highlight would be. At least it works for me like that. So again, edge highlight along there and here. And I'll let you guys carry on with the rest of the armour and we'll jump back in a bit. Okay, so once all your gold's done, this is what you'll be looking for. I know it doesn't pick up too great on the camera, but you can sort of see the yellow area, the gold, the more rose red of the darker areas of gold along the boot there. Obviously we've come down the shin along here and here, but we've left the underside here. We have done a small amount there, the same as this. Come down one side, leave the underside. So what we'll do now is we're going to take some Runefang steel and mix this in with our gold to lighten it up slightly. Now we want this almost silver looking rather than gold, because this is going to be for an extreme highlight area, basically edge highlighting, spot highlighting, as metal does tend to reflect the direct light source, so you will get spot areas. So I'd say we're looking for maybe 4 parts silver, 1 part gold ish, give or take. Just thin that slightly. As this is edge highlighting, we don't need too much paint on the brush. Just a small amount, and all we're doing is edge highlighting the gold, the brightest gold areas. Obviously we've had the gold highlight into the duller areas, so this is just for the gold areas itself. So we will put a small amount up here and just pull that off. It probably doesn't pick up too well on camera with this, as it is almost a similar colour. The problem with painting with true metallics is the light reflects off all the metallics, making it a little bit difficult to see. So again, we'll just go small amount in here. Edge highlight just on the rim there. If you can pick up the studs, do that if you want, but it's not necessary. So edge highlight just there, don't come down into that deeper area. Spot highlight just in the center. Edge highlight just on some areas of this. Now the further away from the light source, the smaller the edge highlight. Now as you can see, if we angle this right, not too much light source is going to hit anything down this knee. So again, we'll just spot highlight along the top there. Actually, I think this does stand out quite strong on the camera. Edge highlight the tips of the feet, don't come all the way down the side. But make sure you do get both sides on this foot. Just a small edge highlight just here. If you want, you can run a thin line just off center, just over halfway down there for a highlight. While we're here, guys, I am planning on doing more in-depth tutorials on my Patreon. Patreon for things like this. I've just got to get them set up. So if it's something you're interested in, as I don't have the tiers for that set up yet, I just have the excuse me, I just have the supporting tier. Make sure to follow my Twitter, as soon as I have enough tutorials to upload, you know, a month or so's worth, so I can get ahead of myself a bit with them. I'll post up there when that new tier goes live, and you guys can follow there. Not only will you be helping to support me and the channel, it means that I'll be able to do more tutorials like this, more in-depth tutorials obviously for Patreon, and more than just focusing on Warhammer. I'll be able to do other things, you know, other miniatures, other companies. Obviously this is for the Mortal Realms Monday. So yeah, basically follow my Twitter for updates. That would be awesome, and I am looking to do as much for our community as I can over the coming months. So there we go. We have the edge highlights on. Now just a small amount for the hands. It's really only the top hand here. The other one is upside down, so it's not going to have much. Right, some people, including myself, have used white for highlight on metal in the past, but I don't recommend it, as it is matte and it does give a matte look to it. Mixing the gold with the silver means that although you're dulling the paint slightly, it is still a metallic colour, so you are having a metallic highlight. Okay guys, and there we go. That is the model finished. You see the gold there, we've got the highlights, we've got the spot highlights just on the top. So all that's left to do is the base. And once you're done, it should look something like this. Right, and there we have it guys. There he is, all finished up. Base complete. So just want to thank you for following through to the end. If you enjoyed the video, please leave it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can follow me for more videos just like this. Every Monday is Mortal Realms Monday. There may be a few exceptions, obviously with the coronavirus thing going on at the moment. Some deliveries are being delayed. I know that I am behind on a few magazines now, a few issues, but they are trying to sort that for me, so hopefully I'll be able to catch up. But yeah, there we go. If you'd like to support me, you can follow me on, or you can support me through Patreon. I just have a basic tier on there at the moment, but I am looking to upload tutorial videos. There's a few PDFs on there at the moment that you will have access to with the bottom tier. Later on there'll be a couple of higher tiers for more in-depth tutorial videos, you know, non-metallic metals, metallic metals, shading, highlighting, layering, wet blending, you know, all the techniques basically. So they'll be available for you. If you follow me on Twitter, then as soon as I've got that sorted for Patreon, I'll update on Twitter, and I'll probably do a quick video here as well, showing you all the you know, a quick snippet of the goodies. So yeah, links for all of that is down in the description below, and I shall catch you guys next time. Thanks a lot.